All right, here's a 3-part video about the possible ban of cell cameras in Kentucky. The first part is maybe the most important. It is a clip from the actual commissioners meeting discussing this. I think it's important to understand that this is very much up for discussion. They talk about some of the talking points of why this is potentially going to be implemented. And then most importantly, they encourage to hear from sportsmen. So if you have an opinion on this, be sure to reach out, have your voice heard. And then the next 2 parts are diehard deer hunters that use cell cameras on public ground. The first one is Reese Johnson, who is a Kentucky resident. We get his opinion. We also talk to Jake Bush, who hunts multiple states and runs cameras across the country. We get his opinion. So I hope you guys really enjoy this. Sure. Here we go.
Prohibit use of cellular or wireless trail cameras on WMAs and public hunting areas. Specifically, promulgate a new regulation or amend 301K R3010 to prohibit use of wireless or cellular trail cameras. Requirement for all trail cameras used on WMAs, public hunting areas, to be externally labeled with its owner's customer identification number and exempt the department and its agents conducting research, communications, enforcement, and other authorized management activities. And just to repeat again, this is one where it's been comment divide with respect to we want to allow wireless cellular cameras on public lands, or we do not want to allow. Okay. It was our job to bring it forth and proceed.
Well, and again, we're going to get a lot of input from sportsmen about that. We're going to get a lot of questions from commission members about the information provided. Go ahead, Commissioner Horn.
I can just speak about the comments I've received, and mine weren't divided. It was all negative. And from what I've received, they're not for this moving forward into a discussion item from new business.
Okay. Just one question.
Go ahead.
Cell cameras? Why?
Sure. So some of the things that have been relayed to us are specifically to public lands. Hunters are running into, they go on public lands, and there's many trail cameras on the public lands. So they feel like hunters are possibly marking territory with those trail cameras, or it's some people feel like if there's already a camera there that they can't hunt there, they shouldn't hunt there. So they're being good sportsmen and women. It's been reported fair chase and traditional hunting values feel like on our public lands that we manage, maybe we're getting away from those with, again, cellular or wireless cameras. And there's discussion of surveillance issues on our public lands, specifically with trail cameras, but more so your cellular and wireless. And then we've had information from the Corps of Engineers that they are starting to see an uprise in many cellular cameras. Now, I think it's important that I go revisit what we listed in here with respect to customer identification number on trail cameras. That coincides with things you've already heard today. We talk about deer stands, and we talk about your trot lines, jug lines. We're trying to go to where we can identify these things that are left on our public lands. We have nothing there currently for trail cameras.
And I might add that from a law enforcement aspect, it might help people who have had one stolen recover their camera because their number's on there. So it's a great thing for the owner of the camera. You know, you're thinking of it being oppressive for the owner. It's a pretty good thing for the owner of the camera to get it back if you all find it in somebody's trunk. You can look up that identifier and say, somebody's stolen your camera, here it is.
We have thefts of trail cameras on our public lands, and also there's nothing that prohibits trail cameras being left on WMAs year-round. So we don't know if they've been forgotten, if they're trash, if they've been displaced. We have no idea, but if we have a customer ID number, we can at least contact somebody.
I believe the big issue that I have heard, and not to interrupt you all, is cellular versus non-cellular. You know, just having to go back and get the SD card. Haven't you had trouble in the elk zone? Is that one of the places you've had the most trouble with cellular cameras in the elk zone?
Not to defer, but I think this originated somewhat before my time, but Mr. Robinson or Dr. Hass could probably speak more specifically on the elk issues.
We have, and we're going to get to that in our next item specifically, but there have been some issues with
on the elk. Okay, I see. Okay.
So
go ahead, Jerry. So we know that this is a new item, so be thinking of, when you go home, sit down and write down the questions you have or the concerns, or like Paul did, here most of my constituents say this or that.
I guess what I would say is that I guess my district didn't even want it to move on as a discussion item, so do we want to move it on as a discussion item or not?
Well, I'm going to ask here in a minute for objections to moving it on, and if there's objections, we're going to have a vote concerning the objection to move it on. If it's a new business item, we've been automatically moving them on without a request, but if we get a specific motion to stop it where it is, then we'd have to vote on that if it's a motion on the floor. Go ahead, Jerry.
I personally think it's a good idea to be able to identify whose camera it is. But you got to realize when you step out your front door in the morning, there's a camera on you anyway. there's cameras everywhere now. And so to think that just because you put a camera up, that's your specific area to hunt, it's probably, it's just not, I wouldn't think that. I mean, I can see where some people might, but there's cameras everywhere now. I don't see what the big deal is. If you're not doing anything wrong, you should be okay.
Any other comments before we either move on or get a motion concerning moving this? Any other comments? No other comments. Paul, do you want to make a motion, or are you okay with moving it to a discussion? You can stop it going on to an action item the next time.
It's fine.
If you want to make one, whether to move it on to.
I'm just saying, no one, my group is the same as what Greg said. Why?
Right.
Why are we trying to single this out now? So I guess lack of understanding. So I just, instead of wasting the time and resources, just see how everybody else feels. If we want it to move on, we move it on. If we don't, we don't.
We can entertain a motion. If you object to moving it on, we can entertain that motion.
My group's like 50-50. I got people for it, people that don't care, and people that are against it.
The opinions are important, but a motion, if we're going to have a motion, we got to deal with the motion. If we're not going to have a motion, we'll move it on to action,
Let them have time to get more feedback
discussion.
from their districts.
Okay. That's okay with you all, and you all will supply that. And we'll hear from sportsmen. I can't say enough. Hearing from sportsmen is extremely important to all of us, and I know I hear comments from all of you that you're glad to hear. Whether you agree with it or not, we need to hear it. Okay, so thank you, gentlemen.
Obviously, you spend a lot of time hunting every single day, scouting a ton, and also, I assume, do you run quite a bit of trail cameras?
So I'm running about 90 of them in 5 different states now.
Okay. And so what is your relationship with trail cameras in public land? What's your opinion? I just want to hear what your thoughts are.
So it's funny. I've talked about how many cameras I run, and I've kind of got deemed as like a trail camera guy now, right? Well, I've only been running more than 5 cameras for 5 years. Before that, I had like a camera or 2 because they used to be, way more expensive than they are now, at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's a newer thing, and I've just continued to build what I had, and it's become, in some sense, an obsession with almost like with data or with acquiring new targets.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's not like I'm putting 50 cameras in one area to target one deer. Like I'm broadcasting these out, casting a very wide net, and I'm just trying to learn as much as I can about deer in the process. And I really enjoy taking data and then putting that data in a system to where I can say, hey, look at what's happening here. It could be wind direction, it could be weather based, it could be moon based, whatever it is. I like figuring out those little micro patterns that you really couldn't do as efficiently without cameras, whether it's SD or cellular cameras.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say my relationship it's constantly evolving. It's actually kind of funny, I'm sure we'll get into this, but this year I ran, like I said, cameras in 5 states, and I've hunted 4 out of those. I've hunted 4 states that I could run cameras in. I've hunted 1 state I couldn't run any cameras in. That was Kansas.
Yeah.
And I killed my deer in Kansas in 3 days.
Right.
And so like, how much are they actually helping us? I don't know the answer to that. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on how to collect that data and use it, but you still have to go in real time and figure it out.
Yeah.
You have to have the woodsmanship and everything else to even put the camera in the right place to begin with. So for me, it's ever evolving. I'm still trying to figure out exactly, what my line in the sand is necessarily, or what I feel is right or wrong. And the thing that I always try to do is, more than anything else, I like to test things out and then build my own opinion on it. And that way I'm not misinformed on certain situations or certain things. And I think that's the one thing that I can look at, and it's like, okay, well, I've ran, like this year, I'm running over 20 cell cams, and I've got cell cams in actually Kentucky right now, Indiana and Ohio. And out of those 3 states, I mean, I don't think that I personally haven't developed any sort of kill pattern on a deer up to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, man. It's ever changing, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to describe it, because I think there is this false perception if you run a lot of cameras that you're automatically going to kill a big deer. And I think sometimes, for me, it is cool just to see what deer do and try to learn all these different patterns. And there's just so many different things you can pick up on. versus if you ran 5 cameras or whatever the case may be, because the more data you have, the more things you can learn, the more pattern recognition you can have, may help you down the road. And it might not even be that deer that you got pictures of. And that's what I've learned from running 5 cameras to 10 cameras to a lot more than that now. And I think it's really interesting. So you mentioned you run cell cameras on Kentucky public land, and we've caught wind that they are trying to ban cell cameras on Kentucky public land. I guess to cut right to it, what's your opinion on this?
Oh, so my opinion is very simple. In my opinion, in any legal thing in the hunting industry, is that I just don't want to create a divide. That's the number one thing going through my head is I don't want to create a divide amongst hunters, because the more we do that, the weaker we are as a whole, and then it's easier for things that we don't want to get implemented to get implemented.
Mhm.
And so, I hear a lot of chatter about guys that don't like cell cams, or guys that don't like drones, or guys that don't like crossbows during compound season, or whatever it may be. And my opinion is that whatever is legal and whatever gets you outside and gets you, out there in the great outdoors, enjoying your time with your friends and family, I'm all for. Like it's not a competition to me. I don't feel any, jealousy or animosity towards anybody else that goes out and kills a deer because they ran a cell cam. Like there's plenty of them out there. We can all chase our chase and have our own hunt.
Mhm.
So for me, I personally don't like to see things like that are just helping people get out there and helping people be successful get removed.
Mhm.
And the other side of that for me is, where is the line? Because, well, we can still run SD cams, right? Well, I've been hunting a deer all year, and anytime I go in the woods, this guy knows I'm after this deer. He thinks it's 200 inches. It's nowhere near 200 inches, but he thinks that it's a world class deer. But he finds my truck, and he went and bought a $20,000 thermal drone to fly around and find me in the tree. So
What?
yes, like, so that's a little different, right? Like there's things going on like that. I'm telling you, right, like I'm running 20 plus cell cams. I think it's like 23 maybe total. And I've had 5 guys on cell cam for less than 30 seconds apiece all year in 3 different states.
Mhm.
And so the intel that I've received, from a surveillance standpoint on other people is nothing compared to a guy that went out and spent $20,000 to see what tree I'm sitting in on a hillside. That's so I don't know. If I look at it as a whole, I just don't really understand any avenue where it makes sense to start removing things, because once one thing gets pulled, like this was legal, it gets pulled. Well, maybe somebody decides, you know what? Crossbows that can shoot 500 feet per second are no longer allowed.
Mhm.
Drones are no longer allowed. Like we could go down a bunch of rabbit holes. And the alarming thing to me is that it seems like a lot of these things are getting implemented without us knowing about it. And
Right.
that's the bigger issue that I have with it is, everybody says, "Oh, it'll never happen. The compounds will never go away," right? Well, they're pretty good at hiding what they're taking away from us. So I think the bigger issue here as a whole is just being one as a hunting community to stick up for things. And
Mhm.
part of that is, in my opinion, allowing people to have their own hunt and not trying to dictate how they're doing that.
Mhm. So, what's your opinion on it, though?
So
So
I mean,
I get the consensus of whatever is legal and fair, do your thing, but
yeah,
I'm giving you the gavel right now
yeah.
to say
So
I veto or let's pass it.
I mean, I veto absolutely. I don't think there's any room for removing them. I don't understand the move at all, to be honest with you. But I don't see any way that they can come at it and say that this is more effective. I mean, you hear like the efficiency debate a lot with cell cameras, right? But most of those debates are happening with people that have never personally ran a cell camera.
Yeah.
And as soon as you actually run them, especially we're talking about public land here. We're not talking about running a cell camera on a water source or on a bait pile.
Mhm.
That's its own conversation. On public land, you have to go out. Actually, you have to look at your maps, right? So we have advanced maps like LiDAR and
It's crazy.
on demand satellite imagery and all, military grade stuff to put us in the right spot. We just took our efficiency of walking around all the hills down to, hey, I just saved, 900%, I have 900% efficiency because I have this advanced map on my phone.
Yeah.
So it puts me in a certain area, and I get in there, I still have to do my boots on the ground. I mean, I know that you've ran some cameras on public and hunted some public. It's
Mhm.
not like you just put it out over a white oak and that buck's hitting it every single day.
Right.
Like the amount of boots on the ground and woodsmanship that it requires to find a patterned mature buck on public land that you can kill with a cell camera is unbelievable. And,
Mm.
I'm nowhere near top of the field at this, but I'm typically a little bit over 1,000 miles boots on the ground every year.
It's
And
nuts.
I might find a couple occurrences of that with these cell cams. And
Mhm.
some years I don't find any.
Yeah.
Some years I don't even find a target buck with cell cameras. And I'm putting a ton of time in. So, the average Joe that's got 10 days a year to go out, those cell cams aren't giving him that efficiency that's being debated all the time.
Mhm.
And so yeah, so for me, I don't understand it.
Yeah, I think there's so many advancements, right? In what we've seen in just the last 4 or 5 years, and it is there's no doubt that hunters' efficiency has increased across the board. I think there's a lot more talented whitetail hunters with so much knowledge, good knowledge that's out there and very available. And I think the average hunter has probably leveled up at least 50%. Anyone that's consuming podcasts year round, I would say across the board, everyone has gotten better. And so you have that into the mix. And the other thing too, to your point, it's almost like this debate would be better on private ground, which that's not the thing that gets debated. I feel bad for the guys that are hunting public, and then they're kind of the punching bag on this argument. And I think maybe some of the root of this is too across the board, and this is just anecdotal conversations I've had as the season's starting to wrap up. A lot of people are really disappointed. They're like, it's not what it used to be. And I feel that cell cameras on public specifically, that's what we're talking about, is like the scapegoat when there's a lot of other issues that are way more pressing. And that's why people have this feeling of what's going on. And it's like, well, what can we blame? Cell cameras on public. And it's like, there's a lot of other things there. I think that would be such easier wins that would truly improve it if you just left cell cameras and maybe you did tweak some legislation on a couple different things that would make such a huge impact.
I completely agree. And I mean, I can look at like limited access, right? That is probably one of the biggest things is private ground is harder to get on. It just is. I mean, the demand for private land is at an all-time high. It's pushing a lot of guys into public. And then those guys are learning through podcasts like yours
Mhm.
and YouTube and everything else and becoming, like you said, better hunters. Like they're leveling their game up. Then they have all these advancements in technology between the mapping, compounds are as good as they've ever been. Crossbows are shooting over 500 feet per second. You have Garmin sights that, you press the button on, they range find for you. And I mean, deer are going to continue to get killed more efficiently. That's the nature of humanity. Like we're going to continue to evolve our technology and it's going to just keep getting better and better and we're going to become more efficient. So I don't know. I feel exactly like you do. I feel like cell cameras are definitely the scapegoat in the situation. Maybe it's the easiest thing to attack. And I think one of the things going on there too is they might see this divide, right? Like they might look at the hunting community and say, okay, where is there a divide right now? Like where can we start? Where can we, get our wedge in to start breaking this thing apart? Well, look at all these guys debating cell cams,
Right.
right? And they're like, okay, well, here's our start. This is the way to get in, start breaking this community up. And that's kind of what's going on. At least that's what I feel like. And
Mhm.
I don't know, man. It's a slippery slope.
It really is. And I think one reason is with Iowa, for example, there was organized groups to try to get crossbows legalized, and then on the opposite side, there was organized efforts to keep them out. There's no lobbyists for cell cameras, as like that's what we do, and there's zero dialogue across manufacturers. Like, hey, we should maybe put our heads together and try to protect this industry. And there isn't any of that. And so I almost wonder if that's a big reason why they look at it. Man, this is an easy win. These guys have no presence and no pushback. And this is the closest thing we have is an open dialogue to at least spark conversation and inner dialogue with people listening of, man, I don't feel right with this. And, it's a very awkward situation right now.
It definitely is. And I think the best thing that we can do as individuals is look at our line in the sand. Like I hear that term all the time. Everybody's got to draw their own line in the sand and just look at yours. And then what I would say is like, look at what you love. Like if you're a guy that loves shooting compounds, In this day and age, how would you feel if a bunch of longbow guys were like, "Hey, we don't think you should be here anymore. Like, we don't think that you should be able to use that during bow season." Well, that kind of sucks because they're trying to dictate the way that you're spending your time in the woods, right?
Hmm.
And it's kind of the same thing with cell cameras. Like, hey, yeah, I know that you don't necessarily want to use them and that's not your path. But as soon as you get into trying to dictate how other people are spending their time, in my opinion, it's a whole different issue. And
Hmm.
so I think at the end of the day, we just have to individually look at, what you love doing and how you would feel if certain things got attacked. And I know that's how I look at it. And I'm like, well, that's why I think as long as it's legal, we should probably keep the things that we have in place.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure it's going to get passed in reality, and maybe if there's organized undercurrent here that can push back or voice their opinions. And the other question is, for the first when Kansas had their ban, we were all reactive to it. No guys in Kansas, and they're like, we didn't even hear about it, and it's already done. So, if anything, this will be a better idea if people really do feel this way and there is pushback or what that legal course of action is in Kentucky. I'm not familiar. Um, but we're going to get some other opinions from folks in Kentucky too on this topic. But it's I wouldn't have guessed that Kentucky's east of the Mississippi, and my gut was, yeah, none of this is going to come east of the Mississippi. I get Kansas. That's kind of a Western state. They're one of the few whitetail states where you have to buy a preference point. Okay, they're a little bit more progressive with those legislations, but to see this east of the Mississippi is a little alarming. And I think if it can happen in Kentucky, it can happen in absolutely any state. What do you think of that?
I definitely think it can. I mean, I see us having the same battle here in Ohio in the next couple of years. Like I feel like it's on its way in a lot of states, and we either have to decide like, hey, we're gonna let these guys win and they're gonna continue to take rights away, or we're gonna have to figure out a way to stand up together. And I don't know what the answer is to that. I'm not smart enough to figure that out, but I know that I would stand alongside other
Sure.
hunters in the community if I needed to withhold and uphold their rights. Not
Hmm.
withhold, I guess uphold their rights.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, and I guess what would be helpful is that maybe I'm going to read what they said here. So this is a document that was sent to me. Prohibit use of cellular or wireless trail cameras on WMA's public hunting areas. Um, Promulgate a new regulation or amend 301 yada yada. Basically, prohibit the use of wireless or cell cameras. And then another thing too is requirements for all trail cameras used on WMA's public land areas to be externally labeled with its owner's customer identification number, which I think is, when we talked about Kansas, I think that was the easiest way to help protect this, where whether there's an X amount of cameras a license holder can run, or I think it's good to have those labeled too, because they can keep track of whatever data they want to. Um, what do you think of that? So do you, because it's like, this is what I've always thought. It's really easy to identify an issue. Everyone can do that. Hey, this isn't right. But what is the solution? And I don't know if there is a clear solution, but I would ask you, what is your solution to this?
I mean, I guess my first question is what's the issue? Because from a guy that runs 90 cameras that has 5 guys walk across his cameras, 5 times a year,
Yeah.
where is the issue? Like when I'm out, I mean, it's so funny because I hear about all this overcrowding, right? But I mean, I spend a ton of time in the woods. Like I get to spend every single day in the woods and scout and hike, and I just love being out there. And I might see a dozen cameras a year total. And
Mhm.
normally they're in kind of weird spots, like close to the road, or maybe somebody finds like a big hub system and throws one on a scrape. But I'm not seeing this overcrowding at all. I've hunted in Ohio 70 days this year, and I haven't seen a single deer hunter in the state of Ohio. And
Wow.
when I was in Kansas, I barely saw any hunters. When I was in Kentucky, we had one other group there, but I had a shot on a buck day 2 where nobody was at. Went to Indiana, never saw a soul. Like, I've hunted a bunch of states and have cameras in a bunch of states, and I'm not seeing all these encounters. So, from an overcrowding, like, I just don't understand the overcrowding argument, and I think that, once again, that argument's coming from people that, A, aren't working very hard to get away, which is just, that's the truth,
Right.
or B, they don't actually have the experience and they're sitting on their couch at home just complaining about stuff. And
Right.
unfortunately, that voice is being heard.
It's funny how that works. The the minority is often the loudest in terms of these complaints, and Yeah, I can't believe that's actually a little surprising though, of the amount of time you spend out there and to run into so little people. So anyone listening to this to me would be, hey, there's plenty of opportunity out there, and point blank, there's just plenty of opportunity out there if you're willing to go do it. And I think you're probably in the 1% of 1% walking 1,000 miles to chase whitetails too.
Yeah, and I understand there's, obviously areas that are going to be more crowded, like, Kentucky early season on the ag. Well,
Sure.
to combat that, like, you can do things. We went to the hills in Eastern Kentucky for the opener and barely saw anybody because we just find like you have to just understand what's going on, then you can make your moves. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not really sure where it stems from. Almost wonder if it's, you know, in this day and age, lack of success, and maybe people just need excuses and they're
Mhm.
being heard. Where like me, I own up to it, right? I've had a terrible year. I've been getting my butt kicked out there, but it's my own fault. It's not because somebody else is out there. There's cell cameras all over the place. It's
Mhm.
my own doing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and I think I've never hunted Kentucky public land, so I don't even feel like in a position to have an opinion on it. But I just think that the biggest thing is, to your point, um, we don't want to create an additional divide, and I also think that we want to protect our hunting rights and at least have a voice heard. So I'm hoping, if anything, this podcast, anyone in Kentucky or anyone that has a strong opinion on this, at least provokes some sort of dialogue, because I think before there's just no dialogue, and I think that's probably step one in this process of people being more in tune with what's going on. And yeah, it's super frustrating and it's super confusing at the end of the day. It's like, okay, of all the things, of all the issues we have and that could be argued, this is what we land on. Right?
So how are these getting proposed? Like, how are they even getting written up? I mean, that's what's blowing my mind here is who's behind proposing this sort of stuff.
So we're gonna have a different guest on, and I think they'll have a better idea for this specifically in Kentucky. I first heard about this early November, and it was just like, hey, we've caught wind of this, don't really know if it's going to happen. And then a couple weeks later, okay, here's the document that shows that this is on, this is going to get voted on, or whatever the process. So I don't know. I wish I had a better answer, but that's something where I have to get to the bottom of, because okay, these are all the issues, these are all the things that we could improve the state of Kentucky public land, and this is what we land on. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
So let me ask you this. So what do you think would be the possible impacts if they do ban cell cameras in Kentucky? And let's even leak that over into Ohio. So like, you knowing what you do, what is the impact in your mind?
I mean, the impact for me is if I'm looking at hunting out of state, I'm trying to find some sort of efficiency. And I have the chase to have in Ohio, and then these surrounding states, I'm just trying to pick up some sort of pattern for efficiency where I don't have to drive out there a bunch to check SD cams or anything else. And so for me specifically, I just see myself not hunting as many out of state hunts, to be
Mhm.
honest with you, or my expectations go way downhill.
Sure.
Like, I go in, especially the states like Kansas where it's just completely banned. You can't run any cameras on public land. Well, I just went out there and killed the first good buck that came by because I have no idea what's there.
Right.
And so, I mean, if you ask me, like one of the things that could potentially happen is maybe we see uh, a deer herd that is less mature because of decisions like what I'm making. And most people probably aren't thinking about that, but I feel like the more camera data people have and the more intel they have, the more apt they are to hold out for a bigger deer because
100%.
they know they exist. Where if you don't know they exist, well, we're going back to the good old days when we're just it's brown, it's down because I have no idea what's out here. At least that's where my head's at. Maybe that's totally backwards, but from a hunting standpoint, aside from just lower expectations and maybe less hunts, like maybe I'm not giving Kentucky my money every year now because I can go to Indiana and run cell cameras still.
Hmm.
Like that to me just makes a little bit more sense because my efficiency is going to go up. I have limited time. I'm a dad, I'm a family man, I have a career. Like
Hmm.
I just don't, those things are important. So maybe that's the wrong answer, but that's my answer. And then from the other side of this, I just keep coming back to the fact that if this gets taken away really easy, well, all of a sudden they're like, Look at how easy that was." Like it's really easy to take these rights away from these guys. They're not really standing up for anything because internally they're just imploding, debating whether they like cell cams or not. So let's keep going after stuff. Hey, we know that there's we know there's guys that don't like drones, right? And they're debating about that. Let's take those away. Oh man, the compound slash crossbow guys are always at each other's throats. Let's start taking that stuff away.
Hmm.
And it just, I think that's the bigger issue aside from like the personal hunting aspect is just once that door is there and they see that they can take things away from us, I just don't know where it stops.
Yeah. And I think from a consumer behavior standpoint, most of the guys that are running a lot of cameras are the most selective hunters. They're the guys that aren't killing, the deer that people complain about, whether it's right or wrong, which, that's a conversation for a different day. But a guy that's willing to invest quite literally thousands of dollars in cameras is probably the most selective hunter out of everyone. And it's like they're hunting one deer or a certain class of deer and usually a very mature buck. So I think you're right that maybe the impact is negative. And I think to your point or your question, what is the issue? And I think that's what provoked this? What was the issue or what was the reason or what was the exact complaint? Or I'd be curious, was it off of survey data from people that had Kentucky licenses? Was that the biggest issue that people seen? And I think I just feel like it's one of those deals like it's really hard to make an opinion when you don't have all the information. And I feel like that's exactly where we're at right now in this conversation. It's like we're kind of grasping at straws and trying to guess or anticipate where their mind is because we don't know.
Yeah, 1,000%. And that's one thing I try not to do. That's why when we started to have this conversation, I was like, I wish I knew more about what the issue was because to me, to like a guy that's out there all the time, I don't personally see the issue.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. It's right. We got to figure it out, I guess.
Yeah. If one thing, hopefully this podcast provokes or ignites some conversation, or at least we can all become more informed on this. Because I think at a minimum, we should be as informed as possible. And however you form your opinion, that's your opinion to do so. Now, this will be a fun one, and I want this one to be a hot take. But if you could magically make one change in legislation for Kentucky or Ohio, what would it be?
Oh, it would be honestly, I would like to see the season separated a little bit. And what I mean by that is I would like to see, a couple weeks where it's just longbow to start. Like let's start with like the most primitive weapon and then work
Yeah.
into everything else. A couple weeks longbow, couple weeks compound,
Uh-huh.
couple weeks, then the crossbows involved and everything else. And um I think that would be pretty cool, but I don't think it'll ever happen. It'd be cool to just have a bunch of what that would do, I think, is you just have a bunch of people that are testing things out, right? Like more people would pick up the longbow, or
Yeah.
maybe some crossbow guys would pick up the compound and just, try to get back to our roots a little bit. That's something I'm really trying to do myself now
Hmm.
is try to like take a step all the way back and just say, okay, I've hunted with all these gadgets and gizmos and everything else. What if I go all the way back? Like, what
Yeah.
does that look like for me? How do I fend for myself out there in the woods? And if anything else, it's just a cool personal journey, I guess. But yeah, I think that would be fun.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, and whether people want to admit it or not, I would say crossbows are the most efficiency booster out there. Point blank, long archery season. With growing up as a kid with a Remington 870 slug gun, dude, a crossbow was more accurate than what that was as a kid,
Oh,
and like that, here in Illinois, that's a 7-day gun season, and now you having a weapon that is more efficient than what a slug gun was when I was growing up, and now it's 3 months. And so I think that would be, if I had to say it was one thing, it's some different legislation for crossbow hunting. And I'm sorry if that upsets people, but that's my opinion. I'm entitled to it. And I think if we had to look at what would make the biggest impact on age class and everything else, that's probably your answer.
yeah. I mean, I agree with you, and especially in a state like Ohio, where we're gonna start catching flack here, but where baiting is legal. If I mean, give a guy a corn pile and a crossbow, and you're gonna kill some deer. You just
Mhm.
are. I mean, especially if you get some cold weather. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
it would
okay,
definitely.
let's do this thought exercise. Okay, so in this scenario, okay, you have a crossbow, you have a corn pile, and you
Mhm.
have a cell camera. Out of those three, what do you think is the most impactful?
Oh man. So in that situation, oh, I don't think it would be the crossbow, to be honest with you, just because of the fact that you could use a compound there.
Sure.
And compounds, I mean, these guys are awesome with compounds nowadays. So I would look at probably the corn pile is the most impactful, to be
Yeah, it's like
honest
the
with you,
chicken or
because
the egg
yeah,
type.
and you could put that out and glass it, right? I mean, if
Mhm.
you had a corn pile behind your house and you just, get up by the sink with your binos every night and you're like, "Oh yeah, he's out there tonight. Oh, he's out there tomorrow. Well, I'm
Yep.
gonna go in the third day." But if that cell cam's just there with a
No
crossbow
corn.
and there's no corn pile, your destination food source is gone. And now
Yes.
you have to all of a sudden, like, it all changes. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So for me, the baiting is definitely the number one efficiency factor before cell cams. And then, I mean, we could go as far as even compounds, right? Even compound bows. Like, people talk about, like, cell cams have, made it like a percentage of efficiency in the woods. And I can look at compounds, and the majority of guys are killing deer with a compound past 15 yards.
Mhm.
Well, okay, well, take a longbow. It's going to be very difficult to do that with a longbow. So if you
100%.
want to talk about efficiency, man, a compound bow is a very efficient tool. Your range is at least doubled probably immediately. And same thing, we've already talked about it, but maps are a super efficient thing. I don't think that cell cameras on public land are any more efficient than, you know what? Like, if you told me, "Hey, you can have one thing out of the two. You can either have your Onyx or you can have a cell cam and go kill a buck."
Yeah.
Without my Onyx, I'm probably useless because I don't know where property lines are at. I don't know where north south is at. I have to have a compass with me. I'm going to get turned around a lot more. I'm going to be a lot more worried about going in really deep and figuring out how to get out of there.
Mhm.
Like, you want to talk about an advancement? That phone is the biggest advancement that we have, way beyond what a cell camera is doing. So if you're worried about overcrowding on public, well, I can tell you right now that there's a lot of guys that A, can identify these public lands, like in Kansas, all the walk-ins, right? Well,
Mhm.
without Onyx, you're driving around or you have a map trying to figure that out. But with Onyx, you just hit the waypoint and drive to, and it takes you right there. It throws it right in your Apple or Google Maps for you, and you get there.
Yep.
So I don't know. If you want to look at overcrowding, like, we've created an app where it's so easy to identify and then navigate and traverse public lands, that's doing far more for overpopulation of hunters than cell cameras ever will.
Mhm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I feel like we're just in a very awkward state of hunting right now, because of all these new things. And I wish I was around to see what it was like talking about, traditional versus compound bows. And I,
Yeah.
I have a feeling there's probably a lot of similar themes in these conversations and arguments, but there's a lot more hunters now. There's a lot more media now. There's a lot more streamlined media. There isn't before, just think about that. If to consume whitetail content, you got to buy a magazine or tune in TV. Okay, there's editors, there's all these different things and compliances. Now we could talk about whatever we want and put it on YouTube. Might get demonetized, but we can post it. So it's
Yeah.
so I think it's just a very interesting time, and I'll be curious what the next 5 years looks like, or what's the next 10 years look like.
I think that's the answer right there, by the way, is media, right? Like, all of these issues and all of these things were put into place before media was what it is now. Like, compound bows have been established for a long time. The new climbing sticks and tree stands and everything have been out for before media was big. They've been out for a long time now. They're advancing a little bit, but
Mhm.
most of that's already done. So all of these debates that had been had, even with GPS apps,
Sure.
like Onyx or anything else, all of these debates happened before social media was what it is now. So the first real thing that we're seeing that's causing divide is cell cameras.
Right.
But it's just getting talked about more than anything else because it's all the other divides happened, pre-social media.
Fair.
And so this is the thing on the forefront, and maybe that's what they're seeing is, hey, look at how much these guys are arguing. And it's like, well, they argued about everything else. It just wasn't out in the open for the whole world to see.
Hmm.
Maybe that's the answer right there.
Maybe. Yeah, that's a good point. So, okay. So, in your opinion, do you think that cell cameras are more of a hot button issue, or baits a more hot topic, or is it or crossbows? Like, between those three, because to me, I think if we're talking purely divide, I honestly think it's probably crossbows and bait piles.
Yeah, those are definitely the hot buttons with divide, in my opinion anyways. Like, I try not to do it, but if I do get on like a Facebook group and scroll,
Oh yeah.
It's like crossbow compound divide. I mean, it's being talked about like crazy, and there's really nothing happening. If anything, they're actually establishing longer crossbow seasons, it seems, as opposed to going the other way. So they're still like giving those guys more and more rights, which is bringing more hunters into it. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I'm
Mhm.
just saying like if that's okay, then what's the deal with what we're doing here? Like, what am I doing that's any more detrimental than what else than a bait pile or a crossbow?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I feel like we're opening Pandora's box, and maybe that's what needs to happen. And it'll be I'll be curious. I heard a rumor too that, and I don't know if there's any validity to this, and I probably shouldn't even share it because it's probably dumb to share it. Like I'm part of the problem here.
Here we go.
But I heard through the grapevine that Illinois was talking about potentially banning cameras off state ground too. I haven't seen any of that or heard anything more, but I think that this conversation is going to become more prevalent no matter what state you're listening to this in, whether it's
Number one thing is if it's of a concern to you and you have any opinion on it whatsoever, you need to call your commissioner who's for your region, reach out to them, send them an email, give a phone call and tell them, exactly how you feel one way or another. Um, so we are just another state, and this is just a trickle. I mean, you're going to continue to see this across the country. Obviously, Kansas pushed it through.
Mhm.
Missouri has the rule, and it's been in place for a long time. No cameras at all on any state lands, and I'm sure we will continue to see more as it goes. So, it's one of those things that's near and dear to my heart, because trail cameras are my passion, hobby, fun. Spend way too much time doing it. Have way too many. But every minute that I'm free, I'm looking for the next one. It's just like every time you check one, it's like, what's going to be on there? What can you find? Where can you go? And so, as it reads to my understanding, it's just cellular cameras for now.
Mhm.
And so that's where, is this the first step? Will it be a total ban? What kind of response will they get? Obviously, Kansas did what they did. They pushed it through very quickly without much
Mhm.
discussion or input from anyone in the general public. And so we'll see how Kentucky handles that. It's yet to be seen. But of course, I have I mean, I can see both sides of this coin. In my opinion, personally, is I can live without cell cams on public land. Um, the total ban would, of course, be that would change everything. Um, and that simply, to me, comes down to, um, in a lot of ways, you're relying solely on those cell cams to tell you what is such a small piece of the puzzle. I've done it both ways. I've ran regular cameras and I've ran cellular cameras, and I feel like I started running cell cams about 3 years ago is when I first started. And a lot of times I think it keeps me out of that area I may have a cell cam and then have 5 or 6 surrounding regular cameras. But if the deer I'm targeting is not on that specific cell cam, why would I go in there? And you're honestly probably missing out a little bit of information from what you could know by staying out of there, because it's a balance of pressure. I mean, that's the obviously the advantage of cell cams is you get the information, you go in there, and you try to capitalize on that. The disadvantage, of course, when you're running regular cameras, if you go into an area, you're most likely going to have more than just one, because they're a little more affordable. You're going to be able to get more information because you're going to have more than a few cameras versus 1 or 2 cell cameras, just for the average person. And so it's just an information battle. And so that's what you're looking for, trying to decipher that and learn, and then execute on that. So I think a lot of times we rely on those cell cams to the point that we do ourselves a disservice. But this other side of that is you have to be able to go in there and get that information with the regular cameras, which you might, if it was non-cellular, you would have to go in there to learn what you needed to learn, but then you may disturb the deer you're going to leave scent behind. And so it's kind of a balance of what what you want to do and what you feel comfortable with. That's where I stand on it. Ethically, I don't think that cell cams give you any greater advantage than a regular cell cam or a regular camera. The people that have been able to get a picture of a deer, go in there and capitalize, especially on public lands.
In that type of terrain too. I mean, I have to imagine it'd be darn near impossible.
Right. I mean, these deer cover so much ground, generally speaking, and I'm usually hunting big woods in Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois. So these pieces, these deer have a much larger home range than you would anticipate. Whereas on a perfectly manicured private land farm, where those deer don't necessarily need or have to go, these deer are either A, searching for food, B, bumped for pressure, or maybe the habitat just doesn't provide. Typically the carrying capacity, the deer per square mile is not the same on public land, especially big woods, compared to private land where there's a variety of different habitat types.
How do you, just your opinion, do you think cell cameras on public in Kentucky are an issue?
There are, as bad as I hate to say it, I mean, you walk around, first thing I do, if I'm out scouting, looking around, I find a scrape, I'm going to start looking up. It's like, who just got my picture? Where's the camera? If you find a scrape, that's instinct now. And then it's like, okay, did somebody, are you going to put a camera here? Somebody else going to have a camera here? And I've changed my strategies in a lot of ways to maybe not have so many cameras on the classic features that other people do, just because of the opportunity for somebody to either, mess with the camera, take the camera, steal the card, whatever it may be. So, that's something that I've had to adjust to, running my cameras on there as well.
And so as far as, is there people complaining about the amount of cell cameras on there? Or I guess what was the root cause of why they wanted to implement this potential legislation?
I still don't have a clear answer. I've heard it could be everything from privacy issues, the having personal property on public lands. Those are a couple different arguments that I've heard. The ethical side of things, of course, is another point. And just the amount of them out there. It is getting to be where, as cameras have become more affordable, you start to see cameras and they just, there are many of them. And so that's where, I enjoy public land specifically because of the challenge it provides. And, there's nothing like, targeting a specific mature deer on whether it's private or public is the ultimate. I mean, I think we all know that if you're able to follow a deer, have history with it, 3, 4, 5 years old, for example, have some sheds to it, that is that's the pinnacle. And to be able to do that on public land just adds another level to that challenge. And that's where these are the most beneficial for me personally, because I've had encounters with at least a couple of 3-year-olds that I had pictures of last year and this year, that would, high 30s, low 40s deer, solid deer. Can't wait to see what they turn into if they survive. But had I not known those deer were in the area, what they would look like, and did not have that intel, those deer come by me without any knowledge, I may have, been like, okay, well, this is what's in here, and this is what I'm going to shoot this deer, just to get down and find out it's maybe not the mature deer I was looking for.
Yeah.
So that's where the having cameras on public land and being able to treat it in the sense of following, watching, being able to target a specific deer, that is where I think it's beneficial to be able to do that, because there are many other people like me who when you run these cameras, you can follow these deer from year to year, get the historical data, and you know what you're hunting. Whereas if you could be the greatest woodsman in the world, the sign is not always going to tell you, hey, this deer is a Boone Crockett, whereas this deer is a mature 130.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's where in Kentucky, we get $1. And so, we could, if our gun season was shorter or moved out of the rut, we could very likely compete with Iowa, Kansas in a greater way.
Mm-hmm.
What saves us is simply the fact that we are a $1 state. So I have passed more mature deer than I care to admit, because I get, and for the last 3 seasons, I have eaten my statewide tag here at home looking for my target specific deer, and it has not come together, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay to eat that tag because I am not fulfilling my goal of targeting my one specific deer.
Yeah. I almost feel that, guys that run a lot of cameras get a bad rap maybe on this perception, but you guys are the most selective ones out of the entire bunch, because you have the most inventory and you're almost self-regulate that you're the most selective, or a very selective hunter too, where I do think if you eliminate that, I think it would be normal behavior to be like, well, this is a good deer, this is what I want to shoot, because I don't really know of anything else. And how much would it change? So let's say this does pass. How much is that going to change how you hunt Kentucky?
It would essentially lower my standards to basically the first mature deer that would come along, because I'm not going to be able to differentiate in many ways. Now, there are some instances where you may find some exceptional sign that will say, hey, there might be a bigger deer in here.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, as much ground as these deer cover, you are not going to be able to just use your woodsmanship alone. And trail cameras are the greatest technological tool or invention probably since the rifle for hunters. And it's also created a great, given us an opportunity to understand and learn more about where these deer travel, the historical data year to year, and to learn all these sort of things. And so I think as time goes on and people become more familiar with it, they will see get comfortable. When you look at so many pictures, you get comfortable with seeing, okay, this is a 2-year-old, this is a 3-year-old, this is a 4-year-old, and you can kind of differentiate the body sizes. You can maybe pick up that this was that same deer I had last year over here slightly, and these are his tendencies. And so for me, I would not, because this, big woods, you're not going to be able to very rarely either get the sighting to know that deer's alive or in that area. Yes, you might have you might find a shed in that area, but what if that is his summer range and he just came home early and you found it in his summer range, but he doesn't spend his fall there.
Right.
And so, there are some pieces that you can pick up, but essentially it would lead me to, shoot the more standard deer that we have in Kentucky, which is 130 to 140 inch deer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think the likelihood of this is going to go through?
I think it's pretty high, personally.
Yeah.
I mean, unless the community gets together and, makes a big enough stink, which I personally am on the fence about it. Cell cams are nice, to be able to have, and I will continue to run them as long as I can. On the other hand, they create they create more pressure. A lot of folks will leave them. Deer shows up, bam, they're there. Whether the deer is actually still in that vicinity or not.
Mm-hmm.
But it allows folks from other states, out of staters, which granted the pressure is, and this could be said for all states, the pressure from out of staters on public land, the popularity of it has risen so much. I've never seen anything like it this year specifically. It was crazy. It just couldn't hardly get away from people. And even though I had the intel of where a deer might live, if there's 3 people running around there with that day, what good does that do? He's been bumped, he's been pushed. And so I think it honestly helps the locals more because we have the opportunity to go in there, check cameras, do what I'm doing. But as a resident of your state, you should, have at least some advantage over what other non-residents have in your state. You should have at least some advantages. I do believe that regardless of the state, and I go hunt other states and am a non-resident hunter across the Midwest, so, but that is part of it. You pay more. You should not be provided the same privileges, maybe necessarily, but to take it away from entirely would probably do more detriment, because it's going to reduce the popularity, and states are funded by license sales, Kentucky specifically. So, people get excited when they get pictures and they go out there and they do those things. If they don't have that to go by, or maybe there's a trail camera picture that's been floated around. We've all been seeing them. We've all seen them. Maybe those things get people excited, like, hey, I'm going to go check out this particular spot.
Mhm.
But if there's not that kind of lore to it, is it going to reduce the pressure? Is it going to reduce the license sales, which is what creates the revenue for the Kentucky Game and Fish? And so that's where, you have to balance the popularity and the rise of public land. So I see really both sides of this.
Mhm.
And it's hard to give a definitive answer. Like I said, I can live without cell cams, but I think losing cameras on public lands entirely would be a shame for the entire country, any state, because, as it's getting harder to come up with leases, permission grounds harder to come by. It's getting to be more and more expensive. So, if all you have is public lands where you can't run cameras, what is the motivation in a lot of ways for many of the hunters?
Mhm.
I think they would spend less time utilizing the public lands, less time out there. Just to think of how many hours I spend on the property running these cameras, shed hunting, looking for specific deer. My hours and usage of the public lands would reduce drastically
Mhm.
if it goes through. And I think that would be said for a lot of other hunters as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. So Delaware, they're banned on public, and then New Hampshire, they're also banned. And I looked up to see what was some of the arguments for Delaware. And so I'll be curious what your opinion is. But so it said a proliferation of cameras deployed on public lands based on a 2021-22 survey. Delaware hunters estimated that approximately 11.1% of hunters on state wildlife areas use trail cameras and deploy an average of 2.3 cameras. An increasing number of complaints from hunters about trail camera use on public lands. Many of these complaints are associated with the ownership and / exclusive use, in parentheses or in quotes, of a particular portion of state land. Once cameras are established there, thus excluding other hunters from using that area. Other complaints are about constant disturbance of an area by hunters frequently checking and moving their trail cameras. What do you think about it? I mean, I can kind of see that argument, but I almost feel like cell cameras are the least disturbing than standard cameras.
I mean, and that's true. And that's the argument of cell versus non. In many ways, just being able to have cameras on public lands in general, honestly, give the deer as much of an advantage as the hunter. Because yes, you might know that deer exists, but if you're not very precise in your actions, in the way you go in and you move that camera, check that camera, do those things, you're giving, you're letting the deer know that you're in there. You're
Mhm.
leaving that scent behind to go check that camera. So it's arguable that the deer are gaining as much help from the amount of pressure versus no trail cameras being in there. Somebody goes in there, they scout, they hunt, and they may have success, that day, if they can put it all together, based off a hot sign.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you agree with the fact of, if you see a camera, do you feel like that area is claimed and you wouldn't want to hunt that, or is that a philosophy that a lot of people follow?
Personally, it does not bother me. I have found spots that I feel like I need to be and have hunted over or near other people's cell cameras or cameras. It does not bother me. Yes, they have a camera there, and I may have one down the way or up here, but just because it's there doesn't give them any more right to it. Now, if there was a truck parked there and it was obvious they were going to go head in that direction, then that might be where you have to draw the line and be more respectful.
Mhm.
But if it's there and no one's there, and that's a good spot, as long as you're respectful of the other folks' property, and you're not in there, it happens. You're going to, it's just a risk you take. Doesn't matter if it's a stand, doesn't matter if it's a camera, anything you leave on public land is, subject to being card stolen, camera stolen. I've had plenty of both. And so, but, you have to respect other people's property. But no, I mean, spot claiming, it does not bother me, and I don't think it should bother other people. If anything, if you find a camera there, it's like, why is this here? What did this individual who might be, have some more knowledge than I do, what did they pick up on to be willing to utilize their resources in this particular spot that I did not see?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. One of the other things was kind of funny. Illegal activities that include the cutting and removal of vegetation from state land when installing a trail camera. Trail cameras also interfere with habitat management maintenance, during which time they either must be avoided or may inadvertently be destroyed. So part of their argument was that some twigs are going to get snapped from their argument to put up a camera.
Well, if you're putting private property on public lands, that's your risk. Whether it's if they do a prescribed burn and they burn that area and your camera burns up,
So be it. Yeah.
so be it. I mean, that's the risk that you took. If it gets stolen, somebody snaps the antenna off, somebody takes whatever, I mean, you knew the risk before doing it. So I can't sit behind that one.
Yeah, another one is privacy concerns due to documented use of trail cameras for monitoring human behavior at public parking areas on popular hiking trails, was another argument for Delaware.
I can't say I have utilized my cameras in such a way. I mean, we only have X amount. Why would you waste it on such just to know who's going in and out? That would have to be pretty petty, we'll say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then another one, this one I kind of get a kick out of. Ethical issues associated with using cellular trail cameras for trophy hunting, to the extent that Boone and Crockett Club, keeper of big game records, does not recognize animals taken by hunters helped in the harvest by cellular trail cameras. So antiquated scoring system is part of the legal thought process on passing this. Kind of funny.
Yeah, I just don't get with the ethical side of things as far as how, the odds of you getting a deer on camera and then successfully being able to go in there and successfully harvest that, as many times as you and I have experienced that and been able to capitalize on that, and all the other folks out here, I don't think those odds are very high.
They're super low. And I think if anything, they usually leave you chasing your tail more than anything in reality. I mean, a lot of times you're a step behind at that point. What, so you still hunt. I'm trying to think how the best way to word. How concerned are you that this is just a slippery slope of a start of removing additional hunting permissions? Meaning, they pass cell cameras. Now we get rid of regular cameras on state ground, and now all cameras are banned for the state of Kentucky.
Well, that is and should be the concern for everyone. Is we already have more regulations than law enforcement can enforce on public lands and private lands. There's not enough. There's not enough wardens out there in any state, any county. They are underpaid and overworked. And, if you have issues, it's so hard to get somebody to help you, even if you have clear, evidence and somebody right there, right then. And so, we already have that issues. And then, so the answer is to write more regulations, but not be able to enforce those regulations. And that's where I have the problem. That's the whole bureaucratic thing. And, that can be said not only about hunting and fishing, but the entire country for that matter. Mm-hmm. And now anything political, which we don't need to get into, but that is the concern, is where is the line drawn in the sand, and when does it stop? And I think that we're going to continue to see this potentially happen in other states, as it's my belief that, basically less is better. In as far as regulations, obviously you have to have things that make sense, but the degree and the specificity of some of these regulations is getting a little bit, out of hand for the average hunter, especially if you're trying, and this is where, another argument you can make is if you're trying to introduce new hunters, you're trying to explain to them the difference, explain to them why you have to do things a certain way on public land, have your name, address, phone number on any piece of property that you leave out there, which is a common law in many states. So, it can be where it's, there's so much, it's like, what if, an honest person misses a small regulation just because there are so many and you didn't do your homework? Yes, you have to do that. I'm constantly double checking everything I do, but where does it stop?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest concern. And it's, something like this, I've talked to a handful of different people, and not, it seems like the overall sentiment is that people aren't necessarily super excited about this. And I think it's more so because they feel that if we lose this, what's next? And then what's next after that? And what's next after that? And I think that's a very, very fair thing to be concerned about. And I think you make an excellent point. We have more regulations that can't be regulated. So it's like,
and then you turn an honest individual who's trying to target a specific deer, those guys who are going to do what they're going to do regardless. Not saying I am, but you make a honest hunter, one who's potentially breaking the law, whether it's inadvertently or on purpose, over something that could be very silly.
Yeah. So what it's interesting to me because you still have access to private ground, right? Or you still hunt a decent amount of private ground?
Yes. So, I mean, I'm not, I'll do anything and everything. I mean, I've got leases, I've got permission ground. I have a couple small pieces the piece that I live on, I mean, I run cameras and I keep tabs on quite a few places as far as what I hunt. I have obviously the most time and ability here in Kentucky. And so I'm going to basically find essentially what would be either, the highest scoring, most mature, whatever sticks out to me, whatever I want to target, I'm going to dedicate my time to that. And so by having options on public land and on private land, it gives me both. But what I have found is a lot of times the age structure is better on public lands, and that can be said for many of these Midwestern public lands, especially when you have large acreages, because those deer are so difficult to harvest that I find a lot of times some of the biggest deer are on those pieces of public because either people don't want to put the work in. It may have limitations of a draw. You can only hunt certain days. You can only hunt with certain weapons. And so a lot of times it's some of the better deer are on public land. So now if I have a deer on private, but I cannot grow. Here with our 3-week rifle season, generally speaking, I cannot grow the size of deer that I now want to target as a experienced hunter who has good deer. So, I'm not just looking for the next 130. I have progressed, and that's how I think all hunters should do. We all start at a certain point, and then you work your way up. And it does drive me crazy, the guys that get stuck into just shooting that first 3-year-old. It's like at some point, and then, you should be progressing as well. And then when you pass that deer and he does survive, you're just letting the next person, whether you kill it or not, fulfill their dream of killing that fully mature deer that they will put on the wall. And so that's what I've been able to find across many different pieces is with the tougher hunting conditions, the age structure is sometimes better. And, there are better years, but yes, there's some years I'll spend my time on private targeting a deer, and there's some years I will spend my time on public targeting a deer. And another thing that I will do personally is I retain my leases because I've got 3 kids, my wife, I like to take my grandpa, got some cousins that come, some friends along the way. So I want them to have places to go. They're generally okay with shooting the deer that I may not be targeting, that I would not want to harvest potentially. So I spent a lot of my time for me on the public looking for the pinnacle, looking for the one mature deer that I can target because, well, there's no greater accomplishment in my mind as far as a whitetail hunter than be able to target a specific deer on public land and then make that happen. Whereas, on private, that's of course the next notch down. But that, yes. So I go back and forth, but those are the deer that, so anyways, I keep less pressure off of my private farms by hunting the public, which may be selfish in some ways, but I'm also looking for usually 1 or 2 specific deer. And, the amount of mature deer that I've passed on I usually video them. So I can show it, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a magic wand here, and you get to change one piece of legislation in the state of Kentucky to make it better. And so in the purpose of this exercise is to illustrate, it's like we have, like this is the legislation that's getting pushed, but I have to imagine there has to be some other things that would be more impactful for everyone and be a positive benefit for everyone too. So what do you think that one piece of legislation could be?
Be moving the rifle season out of the rut and making it similar to Oklahoma or Ohio. Obviously muzzleloader and shotgun would be would be awesome. But we're never going to see that happen.
Yeah.
There's so much pressure from, hunters don't get involved near as much as they should. And I do my best, but it's probably not enough, compared to the lobbyists that work for the insurance, whether it's ag or automobile, the pressure that they put, they want deer numbers down. CWD, the only answer they have is to get deer numbers down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you get deer numbers down and you extend the seasons, you have special CWD seasons, you lose your age structure. Therefore, you lose your big deer. Illinois, prime example.
Absolutely.
It's not what it used to be. And so we as Kentucky, the only thing that saves us is our $1 buck limit. If we had $2, we would be similar to many other southern states. But anyways, that would be my number one thing. I think baiting is similar to cameras in some way. It is advantageous to a degree, but it is also the only way that some people know how to hunt. And so the odds of killing that mature deer on a bait pile in most places, private or public, well, you can't do it public, but on private even, those odds are not great unless he's with the doe. And even then, he's not eating corn. Usually he's standing at the back looking for her, or he's scent checking and he's not coming in. So that doesn't bother me. Bait or no, but whatever, that doesn't concern me right now. If I could do anything in Kentucky, it would be simply to move it out of the rut to a later date around Thanksgiving, and we would see our age structure and overall size increase in compared to some of the better Midwestern states.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny because I think everyone that is a diehard deer hunter in whatever state they're in, they have some of those very clear answers of what they firmly believe would improve the state across the board and improve it for everyone, right? But then it's like all these weird little things that are the ones that go up in the docket to get voted on, and it's usually, making it more like making it easier to kill deer, or B, taking away, trail cameras, for example. It's like, man, there's so many different things that could be discussed.
I'll put I attend a couple of friends, are friends of the public lands groups, and try to do some of those things. And one of the things that was discussed and on the last meeting for Kentucky was to put a limit on raccoons on the harvest overall. It was 2 per night. Now, how much anywhere in the world between just the overall population boom, the nesting, the turkeys, everybody has, you should be obviously trapping if at all possible. But so where do these ideas come from? Who's pushing these things? How do in the world do we need a limit on coons? I just, it's so anyways, yes, it is goofy to me how some of these things and where these people come from and what is their actual experience with spending time outdoors.
Yeah. And what is the purpose of that? That's nuts. As like the turkey population, all the time and money and resource that went into restoring the turkey population, and then let's put a predator and put a cap on it. So it is nuts. It's frustrating. I think it's really frustrating as hunters, and I think the hardest thing is hard to have it. I think it's hard for us to have a unified voice as hunters too, because I think everyone has different opinions on how things should be done, and so we're divided from the start. And then also to your point, we don't have a lot of organized push on the legislation side, and it is just unfortunately the lobbyists that are on the other side of the aisle of whatever that is makes it almost, I don't want to say impossible, but very, very challenging to improve what we have.
In my opinion, if we look back 30 years from now, the pinnacle of whitetail deer hunting will be around the 2000 to 2010 era. That will be what it was, because from here on, the goal will be, because of CWD and the lobbyists, will be to reduce the overall deer population, because there are too many, and we should be. And the other side of that is we have plenty of does. Shoot it, and that drives me crazy. The meat hunters, you want meat, that's great. You need a place to go. We'll go to the farm. Shoot a doe, and I won't harp on that because you know where that goes. But do your part. If you're going to eat it, there's no better meat in the world. There's no better feeling in the world. Do it yourself. Process it yourself, learn how. There's plenty of opportunities to learn, whether there's field to fork classes or YouTube. Everything's on YouTube. Learn that process, do it for yourself, and shoot plenty of does.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, is there anything else you can think of here on, do you have an idea when that's supposed to get voted upon, or when the next meeting is or I guess what's, if someone's in Kentucky right now listening and they have a very strong opinion, whatever that is, I assume just go to go to the Kentucky Gov website, find your commissioner, and send an email?
Yes, find your region, whichever, I think there are 8 or 10 regions as far as the way they've got Kentucky divided with commissioners. So reach out to them, tell them your opinion. Like I said, like I said, and like you mentioned, to me, it's a slippery slope of where does this all end and when does it become any kind of infringement on private lands?
Mm-hmm.
And when does it keep going? When does it stop? We've encountered a little bit of CWD here in the western counties where bait is now off the table for those specific counties. And it's just it just continues. It just, where does this stop?
On some of those non-bait counties, have you seen age structure increase there with the lack of baiting?
I don't think we have enough. It's only been 3 years.
Okay.
Since they, and honestly, and that's the other thing is, we don't even know. That was triggered because of a CWD case in Tennessee, which was within I think 8 or 10 miles of the state line, which triggered that when they had that positive. But that's also the same positive where the biologist is now claiming that the proper procedure wasn't followed, and it may not have even been a real CWD. So that's actually tied up in court, and there's a whole article on that of the Tennessee biologist and against the state of Tennessee for claiming they had a CWD positive deer that actually wasn't, and then it triggered everything in Kentucky, and they've spent millions of dollars on testing and outposts to do it, and paying employees to take the samples and then getting the sample sent off over what potentially may not have even. And there has not been, to my knowledge, in 2 years, any positives found in Kentucky yet.
Interesting.
So
yeah,
that's its whole other thing. But yeah.
Well, I think you make the point of, and I agree with it, some of the best whitetail hunting may be a thing of the past, and I think that is a really hard pill to swallow. It really is, and it's like, well, so and then you're telling your kids or grandkids like, so what'd you do? What'd you do to combat it? Well, nothing. We just complained about it on a podcast. You know what I mean? It's like what can we do? And I think that's I think everyone has the desire of how can we be involved to make an impact. But I think as a group, and everyone is guilty of it. It's like, how do we get more organized in that to make something better?
So, yeah, I mean, it's just like there was a mention. It may have even been on here of in my lifetime, will night hunting be legal? At what point? Where does it stop? So it's a constant battle of too many deer versus age structure. We want age structure as hunters to have the opportunity to harvest the biggest deer, and so it's a fine line. You have to make it. Not everybody wants that. Some people, the whole point of it is the meat. So, I mean, that's number one. We go from there. So we just have to find that balance.
Yeah, for sure. Where can people find you if they feel passionate and maybe you want to open a dialogue with some Kentucky folks?
Reese Johnson 7 on Instagram, or Reese Johnson. You can search my name with Kentucky or real estate. My website will pop up. Phone number, emails on there. I do spend too much time on Instagram. So anyways, if you want to find me there, I post some deer pictures occasionally. But that's pretty much it.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on this. Like I said, you're a very good deer hunter, a very dedicated deer hunter, one that definitely can share their opinion on this because you run a lot of cameras and you're in it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and hopefully, I don't know what the best outcome is of this, but whatever it is, I hope that's what happens.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me, and like I said, maybe my opinion's worth something. It will be interesting to see how many other states potentially follow suit and what will come of it and what it's going to look like in 5 years.
Yeah. And one last thing here, I kind of felt Kansas is a little bit more progressive. They're one of the states that have a point system for whitetails, and it's, we'll call it a Western whitetail state, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is aside from the very far Northeast with New Hampshire and Delaware, this is the first one of like a Midwest big buck state east of the Mississippi even. And so seeing and hearing this, like if it can happen in Kentucky, it could easily leach over into any of these states very easily.
Yep. And these discussions are being had on a state level and a federal level. And so, if you have any reserve, any particular piece of public you had in mind, you need to be reaching out and voicing your opinion one way or another to those in charge.
Yeah, definitely. Well, really appreciate it, Reese. Good luck the rest of the season. Good luck in Iowa. I look forward to following along, and we'll see how this unfolds.
Sounds good.